Lake Bodom is a Finnish lake located in the city of Espoo, not far from Helsinki. On a summer night in June 1960, 4 teenage friends decided to go camping at Lake Bodom. Mela Bjorklund and Anja Moki were both 15, and they went with their 18-year-old boyfriend Seppo Boisman and Nils Gustafsson. That night, sometime between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m., on Sunday, June 5th, 1960, Mila, Anja, Seppo were all stabbed and bludgeoned to death. The 4th teenager, Nils Gustafsson, was found with fractured facial bones, but survived the attack. Shortly after 6 a.m. on that Sunday, a group of bird watchers were walking along the lake and reportedly noticed a collapsed tent from afar, and also saw a blond man walking away from the campsite. At approximately 11 a.m., hours after the birdwatchers saw the tent and man walking away from the site, a carpenter named Esko Johansson discovered the victims. He alerted the police, and they arrived on the scene at 12 o'clock that afternoon. An investigation immediately ensued. First, the police questioned the only surviving victim of the attack, Nils. Nils stated that he had seen a glimpse of the attacker and that he saw them clothed in black with bright red eyes. After a thorough investigation of the tent, along with Nils' statement, the police came to the conclusion that the victims had not been injured from inside the tent, but rather had been attacked from outside the tent. While the murder weapons had never been located, they believe a knife and another blunt object were used in the killings. The killer seemed to take multiple items from the teenagers as well, which detectives found odd, because while the keys to the victims' motorcycles were taken, they were also left behind. The only survivor, Nils Gustafsson, his shoes were found 500 meters away from the murder site, partially hidden in the brush. Unfortunately, the police did not tape off the scene, so almost right away a crowd of police, detectives, and investigators walked through the crime scene and trampled evidence. The clumsiness of the initial investigation was further exacerbated by calling in soldiers to assist with the search. They searched around the lake for other missing items of the teenagers, but several of the items were never found. Mila Bjorklund, Gustafsson's girlfriend, was found undressed from the waist down and was lying on top of the tent and had suffered the most injuries out of all of the victims. She was stabbed multiple times after her death, whilst the other 2 teenagers were slain less brutally. Nils Gustafsson was also found lying on top of the tent. There have been numerous suspects over the course of the investigation of the Lake Bodom murders, but most notably 2. The first suspect in the case was Carl Valdemar Gillstrom. Many people initially suspected Carl, a local kiosk keeper, because he was often hostile towards local campers. He reportedly cut down tents, threw rocks at people who came to the street he lived on, and was known to be a violent man. Police found no evidence linking him to the murders and were skeptical of alleged confessions he was said to have made regarding the murders because he was thought to be mentally disturbed. The police never recovered DNA from Gillstrom either. A book released in 2006 brings up a theory in detail, though. The book also claims that the police almost immediately ignored much of the evidence pointing to Gillstrom as the murderer. Unfortunately, Gillstrom died in 1969 at Lake Bodom by drowning, most likely by suicide. The other suspect, Hans Osman, lived several kilometers from the shore of Lake Bodom. He was said to have shown up at a local Helsinki hospital on the morning of June 6, 1960, wearing bloody clothes. There was a theory that Osman may have committed the Lake Bodom killings, as well as other murders in both Finland and Germany, but it is said that he has an alibi for the night of the Lake Bodom murders. In late March 2004, almost 44 years after the gruesome murders, Nils Gustafsson was arrested for the murder of Mila, Anja, and Seppo on that June night back in 1960. Nils was not a suspect in the case as far as the public knew, and this was a shock to the community. In early 2005, the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation declared the case solved. Using new forensic analysis, they were able to interpret bloodstains from that fateful night. According to the prosecution's interpretation, Nils Gustafsson had been very drunk, and because of this, he was excluded from the tent until he sobered up. He then attacked the other boy, breaking his jaw in the process, which then escalated into him committing these 3 murders. In late March 2004, almost 44 years after the gruesome murders, Nils Gustafsson was arrested for the murder of Mila, Anya, and Seppo on that June night back in 1960. The trial started on August 4th, 2005, with Gustafsson's lawyer stating to the jury that the murders were the work of 1 or more people, and that Nils would not have been able to kill 3 people given the extent of his injuries he was found with. It had always been known that the shoes worn and hidden 500 yards away from the tent belonged to Gustafsson, who was found barefoot on top of the tent. Modern DNA analysis was significant for the prosecution, as it showed that the 3 murder victims' blood was on Gustafsson's shoes, but Gustafsson's blood was completely absent. The prosecution said that due to the lack of Nils' blood on his shoes, and the fact that his facial injuries occurred at a different time than the attack of the other victims, they said that the only people responsible for the murders could have been Nils. They theorized that Nils committed the murders, faked the theft of some items at the camp, further injured himself, and then went back to the tent where he lay down and pretended to be unconscious until they were discovered. The prosecution attempted to bolster their case by alleging that the group of bird watchers that saw the campsite and someone walking away saw Nils as the tall blonde man that was leaving the camp. It was also said that Nils was heard making an incriminating remark to a woman about the murder over a decade after the event took place. On October 7th, 2005, Nils Gustafsson was acquitted of all charges. The court explained that the verdict was due to the prosecution's evidence being inconclusive, failure to show Nils had a motive appropriate to a crime of such extreme seriousness, and certainty about the facts now being impossible given the time that had elapsed. The state of Finland paid Nils $44,900 for the mental suffering caused by the long remand time, but he was refused permission to sue Finnish newspapers for defamation. To this day, the murders that occurred that night in June 1960 at Lake Bodom remain unsolved.